Have you ever paused, truly paused, and asked yourself why you're so tired? Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the deep soul weariness that lingers even after rest. It's not always the weight of life that exhausts us. Often, it's the invisible burden we carry, the need to control everything. Not just our careers, our relationships, or the future, but the inner need to predict, to define, to hold tightly onto the illusion that we know what's coming. We've been conditioned to treat uncertainty as a flaw to be corrected. The unknown is seen as dangerous. Ambiguity is weakness. From a young age, we're taught to chase clarity like it's the currency of survival, as if having all the answers could shield us from pain. But what if this very need for certainty is what's making us suffer? What if the root of your anxiety, your burnout, your tension isn't the chaos of life, but your refusal to let it flow? Imagine trying to trap the wind in a box. The tighter you seal it, the more it escapes through the cracks. That's what happens when we try to imprison life within the walls of control. Michel de Montaigne, centuries ago, dared to ask a radical question. What if I don't know? And more importantly, what if that's okay? This isn't about giving up. It's about giving in, not to defeat, but to honesty, to presence, to freedom. So before we go further, ask yourself quietly, when was the last time you allowed yourself to not have an answer? And how did that make you feel? While most philosophers of his time were erecting grand systems of logic, mapping the cosmos, or defining rigid moral codes, Michel de Montaigne did something radically different. He turned inward. Picture him not in the public square or at a podium, but alone in his tower, surrounded by books and silence. Outside, the world was in turmoil. Religious wars, political upheaval, plague. Yet Montaigne's greatest quest was not out there. It was within. Not to conquer the world, but to understand the terrain of his own mind. He did not seek to tame truth into formulas or force life into neat categories. He watched himself instead, his fears, his contradictions, his impulses, and rather than hide them, he wrote about them with unsettling honesty, not to impress, but to inquire, not to teach, but to reflect. His question was simple, disarming. Que sais-je? What do I know? Not a boast. A confession, a compass. This small phrase shattered the illusion of certainty. It invited readers not to cling to truth, but to question their assumptions. It was not the cry of a skeptic who believed in nothing, but of a man who believed that admitting we know little is the beginning of wisdom. In a world obsessed with answers, Montaigne found peace in questions. While others built intellectual castles, he opened a window to doubt, to change, to the beauty of being incomplete. So ask yourself now, have you ever dared to observe your own thoughts without judging them? What would you find if you simply paid attention without needing to fix? We often believe that suffering stems from what life throws at us, loss, failure, instability. But look closer. Pain rarely arises from change itself. It's born in the tension of our resistance to that change. There's a hidden loop most people live in without noticing. The more uncertain life feels, the more we try to control it. The more we try to control it, the more anxious we become. And the more anxious we are, the more we tighten our grip. It's a silent, self-reinforcing spiral, like trying to still a storm by clenching your fists. Control gives us the illusion of safety. We plan our days meticulously, rehearse conversations before they happen, obsess over outcomes we can't command. And when life inevitably veers off script, we feel not just surprised, but betrayed. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to constantly hold it all together, to always be strong in charge? Certain we wear this armor so tightly that we forget we're allowed to take it off. Montaigne chose a different path. He didn't numb himself with certainty. He faced the fog. Where others saw threat and ambiguity, he saw opportunity, an open space for reflection, adaptation presence. There's a reason why those who need to control the most are often the most tense, the most fragile underneath. They aren't at war with the world. They're at war with unpredictability. And like any war against nature, it's unwinnable. Let go, not in despair, but in wisdom. The river doesn't fear the bend ahead. It flows into it. So pause for a moment. What are you holding on to so tightly that it's beginning to hurt? And what might change if you simply loosened your grip? Philosophy for many is often reduced to abstract theories, dense arguments, or intellectual games played in ivory towers. But for Montaigne, it was something far more vital, something closer to survival. He did not write to prove a point or win a debate. He wrote to understand why he felt what he felt, to make sense of his inner turbulence, to soften the edges of existence. His essays were not blueprints for truth, but quiet mirrors in which he studied himself without makeup, without disguise, without judgment. He did not aim to solve the riddle of life. He simply refused to look away from it. This is the true courage Montaigne offers us, not the heroism of certainty, but the gentleness of honest observation. To sit with one's contradictions without immediately rushing to resolve them. To let discomfort speak before silencing it with rationality. How often do you allow yourself to see yourself fully, without editing, without spinning the narrative to make it prettier? To observe the anger beneath your smile, the sadness behind your strength, the confusion within your confidence. Montaigne gave himself permission to be all of it raw, inconsistent, deeply human. And in doing so, he gave us permission too. His writing became a form of existential therapy, not by fixing him, but by allowing him to witness himself. With compassion, with humor, with awe. Because in the end, perhaps healing does not begin with changing who we are, but with the courage to watch ourselves as we are. So ask yourself quietly, when was the last time you simply observed your inner world, not to judge it, but to understand it? Most of us live with a silent fantasy. One day, everything will settle. The chaos will subside, our doubts will vanish, the path ahead will become straight and clear. We chase stability like a destination. But what if that place doesn't exist? What if the stillness we long for is not a place to reach, but a rhythm to move with? Montaigne understood this long before modern psychology echoed the same truth. Life is not meant to be fixed. It is not a frozen painting. It is more like the sea, always shifting, always alive. And instead of trying to build dams to halt the waves, Montaigne suggests something wiser. Learn to swim. Even better, learn to dance. He changed his mind often. He contradicted himself freely. Not out of confusion, but because he allowed himself to evolve, to shed old thoughts like dried leaves in autumn, making space for new growth. In a world that pressures us to be consistent at all costs, Montaigne reminds us that change isn't weakness, it's wisdom in motion. Stagnation may feel safe, but it's the still pond that grows stale, not the running stream. So many of our fears stem from change, the fear of losing a role, a person, an identity. But what if the fear isn't about change itself, but about how tightly we're holding on to what no longer fits? Let go. Not because change is easy, but because it's real. Because life is water, not stone. Now ask yourself gently, what belief, identity, or expectation have you outgrown, yet are still carrying? What would happen if instead of resisting the current, you learned to dance with it? Inner freedom doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's not a gift, nor a stroke of luck. It's a discipline, a subtle, quiet discipline of the mind. And Montaigne, without intending to, mapped out a way of practicing it. He didn't preach philosophies, he lived them. He turned daily life into a workshop of the soul, crafting small mental habits that allowed him to remain grounded even as the world changed wildly around him. The first of these habits, doubt, but not the paralyzing kind, the liberating kind. He questioned what seemed obvious, especially within himself. Whenever certainty felt too comfortable, he stepped back and asked, "Is this truly mine, or something I've inherited without examination?" Try that. The next time you feel sure about someone, about yourself, about what's right, pause. Gently investigate. Certainty can be a mask we wear to avoid the messiness of truth. Second, Montaigne wrote not to impress, but to clarify. Writing wasn't performance, it was reflection, a place to meet his own mind on paper. So write, journal, even if it's chaotic, unfiltered, awkward. You're not writing to be read, you're writing to be revealed. Third, be flexible. Life bends, so must we. The oak tree snaps in a storm. The reed survives because it yields. Montaigne believed that the wisest person is the one who can change with changing circumstances. Fourth, laugh at yourself, your contradictions, your reversals, your ego. Humor softens what pride hardens. If you can smile at your inconsistencies, you are no longer their prisoner. And finally, return to silence. Not as escape, but as renewal. Quiet is not emptiness. It is clarity. It's the place where scattered thoughts settle like dust and the self becomes visible again. So now, gently ask, which of these habits could be your anchor in uncertain times? And which one have you quietly avoided? You've walked with Montaigne through uncertainty, contradiction, change, and silence. And now, perhaps something in you is quieter, not because you've found all the answers, but because you've made peace with not needing to. That's the lesson Montaigne left us, etched not in commandments, but in confessions. Peace doesn't arrive when everything is explained. It arises when explanation is no longer necessary. Suffering often begins where control begins, when we grasp at certainty in a world made of motion. Like trying to hold sunlight in your hand, the tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through. But when we stop resisting life's fluid nature, when we meet it with openness, rather than defense, suffering softens. Not because life stops being hard, but because we stop being hard against it. This journey wasn't about theories or philosophy in the academic sense. It was about a lived experience, about remembering that self-knowledge is not a final destination. It's a lifelong rhythm, a dance, a return. Montaigne never shouted, "This is the truth." He whispered, "This is what I see today." That humility, that gentleness is a rare kind of strength. So what now? Don't memorize Montaigne. Embody his invitation. Live your questions. Befriend your doubt. Listen deeply to the shifting currents within you. You don't need to explain yourself fully. You don't need to resolve every contradiction. You don't need to be right. You just need to be real. And realness, raw, flawed, changing, unfinished, is the only soil where peace can truly grow. So before you leave this space, ask yourself, what might change in your life? Not if you knew more, but if you simply trusted more.